Welcome to the deep dive. Today, well, we're tackling a real giant in the consumer goods world, Ariel laundry detergent. I mean, this brand isn't just known, it's practically synonymous with getting stains out, making whites whiter. For millions, maybe billions, it is clean.
It really is. And that massive market presence, that's exactly why we're here today.
Right.
Our goal, and this is really aimed at B2B buyers, distributors, importers.
Yeah, people in the trade.
Exactly. Is to look beyond the shiny marketing promises. We need to really analyze Ariel's full risk and safety profile, get into the nitty-gritty of the ingredients, the compliance challenges, and crucially, the consumer liability risks. Risks that you, if you're in the FMCG business, have to consider when you're making global buying decisions.
Right. This isn't just tips for shoppers, it's serious market intelligence.
Yeah.
If you're sourcing big volumes, especially from key hubs like, say, Vietnam, you need the full picture, the cost, the risk. It goes way beyond just the price per unit.
Definitely. We've pulled together detailed chemical breakdowns, official safety data, environmental impact studies, regulatory info, all tailored to give you the intelligence needed for sourcing decisions that, protect your business and your reputation.
Okay, so let's set the scene. What's the main story here? Ariel works, people like it, but what are the sort of hidden issues that our sources flagged? What should an importer be worried about right off the bat?
Well, the core issue is that cleaning power often comes with a chemical cocktail that carries significant and often under-discussed risks. Our sources point to three big ones for importers. First, there's the presence of potential carcinogens, specifically 1,4-vol-dioxane. It's a byproduct from making key cleaning agents.
Okay, carcinogens, that's serious. What else?
Second, a really severe, immediate danger to kids from the concentrated PODS. They look like candy, and the results of accidental exposure are awful. It's a unique risk to that format.
Right, the PODS are a whole separate issue almost.
They are. And third, the massive headache of navigating wildly different global regulations. Think about the gap between, say, the EU's strict REACH rules requiring lots of transparency and then much looser regulations you might find in the US or parts of Asia. It's a minefield for compliance.
Okay, that definitely changes the focus from just how much can I sell to what are my risks. Let's start with the chemistry then. The foundation of Ariel's power, the surfactants, specifically sodium lauryl sulfate, or SLES.
Yeah, SLES. It's incredibly effective, no doubt. Great at lifting dirt and grease. That's why it's everywhere in cleaning products. But the risk isn't really from the SLES molecule itself. It's lurking in how it's manufactured. It often involves a process called ethoxylation.
And ethoxylation, the sources say, is basically done to make the surfactant gentler, less irritating on the skin. Sounds it, but there's a catch, isn't there?
A big one. To get that milder effect, the ethoxylation process almost inevitably creates a byproduct that ends up in the final detergent, 1,4-dioxane. And this is where the safety calculation really shifts.
Because 1,4-dioxane is
Classified by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, as a likely human carcinogen. So think about that from a B2B perspective. You're distributing a product meant for daily, close contact with skin, and it contains a chemical officially linked to cancer risk.
So if it's a known carcinogen, why isn't it just removed?
Yeah.
And how are people actually exposed if clothes are rinsed? Doesn't it wash away?
Well, manufacturers argue the levels are very low, just trace amounts. But independent tests often still detect it. It's a balance for them, risk versus performance and mildness. And frankly, how much risk is tolerated varies hugely depending on where you are in the world. That's the importer's challenge.
Yeah.
As for exposure, rinsing helps, but it's not perfect. There are two main ways it happens. First, skin contact. Tiny amounts of 1,4-dioxane clinging to the detergent residue left on fibers stay on your clothes. You wear them all day, every day. That means continuous, low-level absorption through the skin.
And that leads to concerns about buildup over time, long-term exposure.
Exactly. It's the cumulative effect. Cancer risk is the headline grabber, but long-term exposure to 1,4-dioxane is also linked to other serious issues, particularly organ damage. We're talking potential harm to the liver and kidneys over years of this constant low-level contact from laundered clothes. It's kind of an invisible risk.
Wow, okay, so skin contact is one pathway. What's the other?
The air you breathe in your home, inhalation. 1,4-dioxane is volatile. It can become airborne, especially during the heat and tumbling of washing and drying cycles. Think about laundry rooms, often small, maybe not well ventilated. You could be breathing it in.
And this ties back to regulation again, doesn't it? You mentioned some U.S. states are already clamping down.
Precisely. Places like New York have set really strict limits, parts per million thresholds for 1,4-dioxane in cleaning products, with deadlines for manufacturers to comply. So, if you're an importer selling globally, you can't just trust the product label. You might need actual documentation, like a certificate of analysis, proving the residual levels meet the specific rules of your target market.
So the burden falls on the importer to get that proof.
Absolutely. You need to ask the manufacturer for independent verification, especially if you're shipping to regions with stricter rules or even regions likely to adopt stricter rules soon. Relying on the label alone, that's risky when regulators start asking for hard data.
Okay, let's shift gears to another major part of the product, the fragrance. The scent is a big part of Ariel's appeal, but the sources suggest issues with transparency and the chemicals used.
Yeah, this is a really murky area in the whole FMCG sector. Fragrance formulas are often protected as trade secrets. That means manufacturers don't have to list every single ingredient.
Which is a problem for importers trying to verify safety.
It's a huge problem. You could be selling a product with dozens of undisclosed chemicals in the fragrance alone. And when independent labs do test these products, they consistently find chemicals that raise red flags.
Like phthalates. The sources mention things like diethylphthalate, benzyl butylphthalate. What do they do, and why are they a concern?
Right. Phthalates are often used to make scents last longer, stick to the fabric. Consumers like that lingering, clean smell. But the issue is their chemical structure. They're known endocrine disruptors.
Meaning they mess with hormones.
Exactly. They can mimic or block natural hormones in the body. And this kind of interference is linked to some pretty serious health problems, things like reproductive disorders in adults and even developmental delays in children. And again, the exposure isn't just when you do the laundry, it's wearing the clothes afterwards.
So chemical residue on the clothes is one issue. Then there's the air quality aspect again, with volatile organic compounds, VOCs.
Yes, the sources are clear. Scented laundry products are significant contributors to indoor air pollution. When they analyze the air around these products at space analysis, they find lots of VOCs released during washing and drying, sometimes over 25 different hazardous VOCs.
Hazardous, like, what kind of chemicals are we talking about?
We're talking about things like benzene and toluene, chemicals you normally associate with, industrial pollution or gasoline fumes.
Wow. In your laundry room.
In your laundry room air. And these VOCs can worsen respiratory problems like asthma and just generally tank your indoor air quality. For a distributor, think about warehouses too. Storing large quantities of this stuff, especially if ventilation isn't great, that's an occupational health risk for your staff, potentially even a compliance issue depending on local air quality rules for workplaces.
Okay, one more chemical risk area to cover here. The stuff that causes immediate reactions like allergies and skin sensitivity.
Right. This brings us to preservatives, things like benzisothiazolino. It's needed to stop bacteria or mold growing in the liquid or gel, which helps with shelf life, obviously important for global distribution.
I didn't know an allergen.
It's a very common contact allergen, yeah. A major cause of allergic contact dermatitis.
And the tricky thing with these allergies, as the sources point out, is that you might not react straight away. It can build up.
Exactly. It's often a delayed hypersensitivity. You might use the product for weeks, months, even years with no problem, but each exposure is sort of priming your immune system. Then one day you cross a threshold and bang, you develop a persistent rash, dermatitis, that flares up even with tiny exposures later on. People get really frustrated because they can't figure out what changed, but it was this gradual sensitization process.
Okay. And besides preservatives, there are other irritants, like optical brighteners. They have a specific interaction with light.
Yes, optical brighteners are fascinating. They don't actually clean. They make fabrics look cleaner and whiter by absorbing UV light and re-emitting it as blue light. It's a visual trick.
But they stick to clothes and then to skin.
Right. And when they're on your skin and that skin is exposed to sunlight, they can trigger photosensitivity.
Photosensitivity, so like a sun allergy but caused by the detergent. That sounds like a potential liability nightmare.
It can be. The brightener chemical absorbs the UV energy from sunlight while it's on your skin, and that energy absorption can trigger an inflammatory or immune reaction. You get rashes, irritation, but specifically on sun-exposed areas. Think about distributors selling into sunny regions, Southeast Asia, Australia, parts of Africa, or Latin America. If your customers work outdoors, construction, farming, fishing, and they develop these reactions from clothes washed in Ariel, well, that's a direct product liability risk you need to factor in.
Okay, so we've laid out the chemical profile in detail. Let's connect this directly to the market now. How do all these safety concerns translate into real-world business risks for importers and distributors?
Well, the first thing is how people actually use the detergent. often not according to the instructions. The biggest factor that makes all these risks worse is simply overdosing.
Using too much.
A
We
little
all
bit.
do it, right? Just one more capful for good measure.
Exactly. People think more detergent equals cleaner clothes, especially for really dirty loads or big machines. But using more than recommended doesn't just waste product. It dramatically increases the amount of chemical residue left behind. On the clothes, sure, but also building up inside the washing machine itself creates a sort of permanent chemical film.
And the type of fabric makes a difference in how much residue sticks around. That seems important for distributors targeting specific clothing markets.
Crucial difference. The sources really highlight this. Synthetic fabrics, think polyester, nylon, all that modern sportswear and activewear, they cling on to detergent chemicals much more tightly than natural fibers like cotton.
So those traces of 1,4-dioxane, the phthalates from fragrances, they stick around longer on your gym clothes.
Much longer. And think about it. Activewear is worn tight against the skin. You're sweating. Your pores are open. It creates the perfect conditions for maximum absorption of whatever residue is trapped in those synthetic fibers, plus increased risk of skin irritation or allergic reactions.
So if you're a distributor and a big part of your market is, say, trendy sportswear, you should probably factor in a slightly higher risk associated with conventional detergents.
Logically, yes. The potential exposure is higher. And remember, the photosensitivity from optical brighteners. While cotton might release them more easily, the brighteners that do stick to synthetics might stay there longer, prolonging that photosensitivity risk for people wearing activewear outdoors.
And we absolutely have to mention the risk to the most vulnerable group.
Children. Always. Their bodies are just different. They have a higher surface area to body weight ratio than adults.
Meaning more skin relative to their size.
Exactly. So the same amount of chemical residue on clothing represents a proportionally larger dose for a child's system. More skin surface absorbing it relative to their smaller body mass and developing organs. This increases their risk from any residual chemicals left in bedding, towels, clothes.
This complexity really underscores the regulatory nightmare we touched on earlier. Especially the stark difference between how the US and the EU handle this. Let's really contrast those approaches.
The difference is pretty stark. In the US, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, generally works reactively. For many detergent ingredients, especially those hidden in fragrances, there's no requirement for pre-market safety testing or approval.
So they wait for problems to show up after it's on the shelves.
Largely, yes. The system relies heavily on manufacturers doing their own internal safety checks, and on consumers or watchdog groups reporting issues later. The burden of proving safety isn't really on the manufacturer before selling.
Which puts the importer in a tricky spot, relying on the manufacturer's word.
Completely. The responsibility for safety evaluation effectively gets pushed down the supply chain to you, the importer, the distributor, and ultimately the end consumer. Now compare that to the European Union's REACH framework.
REACH registration, evaluation, authorization, and restriction of chemicals. Sounds comprehensive.
It is. REACH demands much more transparency and proactive vetting before chemicals hit the market. Take fragrances again. EU rules require manufacturers to explicitly list 26 known fragrance allergens on the label if they're present above a tiny concentration, just 0.01%.
Okay, so if I'm sourcing Ariel, maybe made in Vietnam primarily for the Asian or US market where that labeling isn't required, and I want to re-export it to Europe.
You've got an instant compliance problem. Major headache. You'd need to prove whether those 26 allergens are present and at what levels, then update all your labeling. You can't just ship the same box everywhere.
So the importer sourcing from, say, Vietnam needs to be the gatekeeper, checking rules for every single destination market.
Absolutely. You have to verify formulation compliance, check 154-dioxane levels against local limits if they exist, ensure labeling matches each market's specific requirements. That burden falls squarely on you, the B2B importer, the moment that product crosses a border. Managing these shifting regulations is why having a really savvy sourcing operation or a knowledgeable partner is so vital.
Let's talk dollars and cents. You mentioned earlier that initial cost savings on the detergent might disappear. How does this safety risk translate into actual financial hits for a business?
It comes down to liability and reputation damage. You might get a great bulk price on a conventional detergent, but that saving can be wiped out by downstream costs. Think about rising healthcare costs in the communities you sell to people needing treatment for skin conditions triggered by sensitizers, asthma made worse by VOCs, maybe even emergency room visits for chemical exposures.
And those costs can eventually circle back to the distributor.
They can. through damage to the brand's reputation if issues become widespread, through potential lawsuits related to undisclosed ingredients or known risks, and even through something as concrete as your product liability insurance premiums. Insurers aren't blind, they track risk profiles. If the products you distribute are increasingly associated with health issues, your rates could go up. It's a hidden cost of goods sold.
This leads us directly to maybe the most visible and frightening risk. The acute danger of Ariel PODS to children. This has gotten a lot of attention.
It has, and for good reason. This specific product format, the small, concentrated, dissolvable laundry pod like the all-in-one PODS, poses a unique and very critical chemical hazard. It needs to be handled as a separate category of risk.
Why are they so much more dangerous than just spilling some liquid or powder?
It's primarily the visual appeal combined with the concentration. They look like candy, brightly colored, squishy, bite-sized, incredibly tempting for toddlers and young children who explore the world with their mouths.
And if they do bite into one, the film dissolves instantly.
Instantly. That outer film is designed to dissolve rapidly in water. In a child's mouth, saliva does the same thing. It bursts, releasing the highly concentrated detergent directly onto sensitive mucous membranes. It's not like swallowing diluted liquid. It's immediate caustic chemical exposure.
Leading to horrific consequences very quickly.
Devastatingly quickly. We're talking intense vomiting, often leading to dehydration, severe chemical burns in the mouth, throat, esophagus damage that can cause lifelong scarring or swallowing problems, respiratory distress if the chemical gets into the lungs, and serious eye or skin burns if it splashes. The concentration just makes the damage immediate and severe.
The sources mention statistics from U.S. poison control centers. They really paint a grim picture.
The numbers are stark. They show this isn't a solved problem. In 2022 alone, U.S. poison centers logged 11,627 exposures to laundry pods. And here's the crucial part. 6,177 of those, well over half, involved kids under 5 years old.
Wow, still happening that often.
It proves that despite warnings and some packaging changes, the fundamental design of the pod remains an inherent risk in homes with young children.
So for our B2B audience distributing these PODS, what's the absolute minimum safety advice they need to be pushing out to retailers and consumers? How do they limit their liability here?
Education and storage are key. Distributors have a responsibility to hammer this home. The pods must be stored securely out of sight and reach, ideally in a high, locked cabinet. Not just behind a regular cupboard door or lowdown. The container needs to be sealed immediately after every use. And users need to know to handle them only with completely dry hands. Any moisture can start dissolving the film prematurely.
And should distributors also be promoting safer alternatives for families with young kids?
A responsible distributor absolutely should. Actively stocking and suggesting traditional Ariel liquid or Ariel powder formulations as a safer choice for households with toddlers makes good business sense and is the right thing to do. They still need careful storage, of course, but they don't have that unique, tempting, concentrated burst hazard of the pods. It means ensuring you have those alternatives readily available.
That point about stocking different formats, liquid, powder naturally leads into our final section. The environmental impact and how strategic sourcing, especially from places like Vietnam, plays a role.
Right. Before we get to sourcing solutions, we need to briefly touch on what happens when these detergent chemicals go down the drain, because environmental impact is also becoming a bigger regulatory and reputational issue.
Okay, so downstream effects. Let's start with the surfactants themselves in waterways.
Even after wastewater treatment, surfactants don't fully break down. When they get into rivers and lakes, they can be toxic to aquatic life. Studies show they cause gill damage in fish, making it harder for them to breathe, reducing their survival.
And the optical brighteners. We know they cause photosensitivity in people, but what about in the environment?
They persist there too. They don't easily degrade, and they can bioaccumulate buildup in the tissues of fish and other organisms over time. This accumulation is linked to ecological harm, like reduced reproductive success in aquatic species, another hidden environmental cost.
We know the industry moved away from phosphates because they caused algal blooms, dead zones, eutrophication, but the replacements aren't perfect either.
No, Ariel and others shifted to substitutes like polycarboxylates. They don't cause the same nutrient overload, which is good, but the downside is they are generally non-biodegradable. They just persist in the water. And worse, they can actually interfere with some wastewater treatment processes, making it harder and more expensive for municipalities to treat sewage effectively.
And back to air quality one last time. those VOCs from the wash cycle contribute to outdoor pollution too.
They do. The benzene, toluene, and other VOCs released don't just stay in the laundry room. They vent outside, mix with sunlight and other pollutants, and contribute to smog and ground-level ozone, especially in urban areas.
And there was a specific point about washing temperature making this worse.
Yes, a really interesting finding. Using hot water wash cycles can actually triple the amount of chemicals released into the air compared to cold water washes.
Triple. Wow.
Yeah, so think about colder regions or winter washing habits. People using hot water more often are getting a much higher dose of those indoor air pollutants, potentially worsening symptoms for anyone sensitive and releasing more VOCs outside.
Okay, so we've built this comprehensive picture. Chemical risks, liability issues, environmental impacts. For importers, especially those focused on the huge Asian market and sourcing hubs like Vietnam, understanding all this is non-negotiable for safe, stable business. This is where having the right sourcing partner becomes absolutely critical. Couldn't agree more. When you're dealing with a high-volume, globally recognized brand like Ariel, especially the core powder and liquid formats that are huge in Asia coming out of a key manufacturing center like Vietnam, you need more than just a supplier. You need a partner who gets the logistics, the potential pitfalls, the local nuances. That's where specialists like Asia Grocery Wholesale AGW really comes in.
So AGW positions itself as that specialist bridge for global distributors sourcing Ariel from Vietnam.
That's their expertise. AGW focuses specifically on grocery wholesale and distribution from Vietnam to the world. They've got, over 20 years of experience running large-scale wholesale operations. That means they understand how to secure reliable bulk supply, manage the complex logistics, and deliver the competitive pricing that B2B buyers need. And Vietnam is a major production center for Ariel liquid and powder specifically.
Absolutely. Our sources confirm it's a key hub, making it vital for global supply chains. AGW's focus on this market makes them a go-to for distributors needing those specific formats reliably and in volume.
Okay, so for buyers listening who need that reliable supply, the bulk pricing, the logistics handled for Ariel coming out of Vietnam, AGW sounds like the solution. You mentioned there's a direct contact from the sources.
Yes, for specific B2B inquiries, we're talking bulk pricing, volume orders, export details for Ariel detergent or other FMCGs from Vietnam. The contact provided is +8490-904-6308. That's a WhatsApp number connecting directly to their wholesale team.
Great. That seems like a practical step for listeners. Okay, let's wrap up this deep dive. It's been dense.
It has. I think the main takeaway has to be this balance. Ariel is undeniably effective, hugely popular globally. But as an importer or distributor, you have to weigh that market demand against the real risks. The potential carcinogen, 1,4-dioxin, the endocrine disruptors possibly hiding in fragrances, the environmental persistence, and especially that acute child safety risk with the PODS.
So informed sourcing isn't just nice to have, it's essential risk management.
It's absolutely critical. Doing your due diligence, maybe even pushing for better documentation on chemical residuals, and definitely partnering with experienced, reputable wholesalers like AGW. These aren't optional extras. They're fundamental to protecting your business long term.
And this whole discussion really highlights a bigger issue in the industry, doesn't it? About where the responsibility for safety ultimately lies, especially when regulations vary so much.
It really does. When government oversight is patchy, like it is in some major markets for these products, the burden of checking safety effectively shifts. It moves away from the manufacturer and onto the supply chain, onto you, the importer, the distributor.
Which leaves a big question for listeners.
A fundamental one, I think, ethically and financially. When you're distributing products globally and you know robust, independent safety testing isn't legally mandated everywhere you sell, what's your responsibility? What level of due diligence do you need to enforce to protect consumers and your own business? That's something you have to answer with your sourcing choices.
A really crucial point to consider. So for listeners wanting to turn this insight into action, explore wholesale opportunities for Ariel or other FMCG products, and connect with that specialized Vietnamese sourcing partner, the place to go is the AGW website, egrocery.asia.
That's egrocery.asia. And they also have a contact email, contact@agrocery.asia for pricing and bulk order inquiries.
Perfect. Stay informed, manage those risks. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
Thanks for having me.
We'll catch you next time.